Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Ansys Virtual Academy. It is March 16th, and you're joining us to discuss what's new in Ansys Fluent 2021 R1. I know with every new version of Ansys that comes out, there's going to be a lot of new cool features. So we're going to have Snigdha Sarkar, our CFD specialist on my team, to walk us through these cool new features in Ansys Fluent. My name is John Dow. I'll be your host today. Snigdha, please take it away.
Thank you so much, JD. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Ansys Virtual Academy session. As JD mentioned, we're going to be talking about some cool new features and functionalities in Ansys Fluent. Ansys releases these new versions, I think now twice a year. And I just wanted to highlight some of the functionalities that I found really useful for some of the newer capabilities. And we're gonna dive right in. I am gonna go ahead and share my screen. And I might have to switch between my presentation and the Ansys Fluent software a few times today, so please bear with me. So let me go ahead and launch Ansys Fluent from my desktop. Can you guys see my screen? JD, is my entire screen visible?
Yes, I can see the start menu.
Good.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and launch Fluent 2021 R1. 2021 R1 is the latest version. And I start with this step because there are some new features and functionalities within the launcher menu itself. Now, before I start Fluent, I just wanted to let everybody know that with each release, Ansys, does a lot of updates. There are a lot of newer capabilities, both on the GUI and the usage standpoint, and also on the solver and physics standpoint. Today's presentation is going to focus mainly on the usage and GUI features because I thought, let's just make sure that everybody gets some use out of it. So if you're a new Ansys user or an existing Ansys user, you'll perhaps find more use to look at some of the general features that have been updated. But do let us know if you want to know about the solver capability upgrades as well. We can do another AVA. Like always, feel free to leave your comments in the Q&A box or in the survey after the AVA, and we'll definitely take your suggestions into account. So with that, let's look at the Fluent launcher. One new thing that you have in the 2021 R1 launcher is something called the capability level. If you click on this drop-down menu over here, you'll see that there are three options. There is a pro capability level, a premium capability level, and then an enterprise capability level. These are the three different licensing options that you have available with Fluent. If you look at the most lightweight, most low price point licensing option, then that would be the pro capability level. It allows you to use the Fluent solver for getting the highest accuracy simulations that you can do, but with reduced capabilities in terms of models and physics. So for new CFD users who want to do basic analysis, who want to do simple, pressure drop or conjugate heat transfer analysis, this licensing option might be the way to go. But for today's example, I'm going to stick with my premium licensing, which encompasses, the full-blown version and has most of the models available. If you do need more information on the pro licensing, again, feel free to reach out to us and we will be happy to provide you with that information. The other feature in the launcher menu is in the section called recent files. If you were to right click, you could, select clear recent files, and that would clear this section up. I know for me, sometimes when I see a lot of files, then, I can get a little confused about, okay, which was the last file that I opened. So you have that added functionality now. The other really cool thing that Ansys has done with the Fluent Launcher is that now if you get started with, say, a case and data file from a particular directory location, that working directory automatically becomes your default directory. So you don't have to manually browse and select the working directory where all your files will be written. So I think that was a big improvement, and I think that has been a request, that multiple customers have made over the past few years. So I'm going to go ahead and start Fluent in the solution mode, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so now that we are in Fluent, you can see that, I'm using parallel cores in this particular example. I'm going to first of all show this really cool new upgrade that Ansys has made to the appearance of the GUI. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is go to Preferences from the File menu, and then go to Appearance. And then in this color theme, on the drop-down menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose the dark theme. This warning is just letting us know that the GUI appearance is going to change. So I'll click OK. And immediately what you can see is a completely different aesthetic. This is a really cool, very, pleasing to eyes new feature that, Ansys has introduced with this latest version, which is the dark theme. This kind of ties in with the aesthetic that you get from the Discovery platform. And, I only mentioned Discovery because we've had a couple of AVAs that talk about Discovery. And the idea is to make sure that if users are switching between one Ansys tool and another, then, the appearance of the GUI at least is a little bit more coherent and streamlined. I personally like this dark feature. I think it makes the icons pop a little bit more. So I hope you like it too. Just, a disclaimer, if you wanted to switch back to the default theme, you could go ahead and do that. To be safe, it's always wise to, switch Fluent off after you make that change and then relaunch it, just so that, there aren't any glitches and you're able to, restart the program in the default mode as expected. So for today's demonstration, I'm going to stick with the dark theme. Like I said, I personally like it a lot. But yeah, do play around with it, and we'd be happy to get your feedback. So along with the dark theme, what we also have in the new Ansys 2021 R1 is this toolbar over here. I'm going to go ahead and select default, just because sometimes, with previous versions loaded on your computer, your toolbar icons may get carried over. So I just, clicked on default view to make sure that we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and launch an example case and data file. Okay, let's do this one. Okay, so this is a simple, pipe flow pressure drop example. Please don't mind the mesh that you see. It's not accurate by any measure. I just, use the simplest possible example to make sure that the reading times and the reporting times are as low as possible. So what I wanted to do with this example was highlight some of the new features in the newest version. immediately, if you look at the toolbar, you'll see some icons that you may not have seen in previous versions. I'll start with the very top over here. Seasoned Fluent users are very, they'll be able to use the display mesh functionality quite easily. If they have to examine the geometry, examine the mesh, they know where to go. But for some of the newer Fluent users, it's been, sort of a challenge to, make sure that they're able to display the geometry well. So you have this icon over here at the top. If you click on it, then you have the mesh display window pop up, and it's the same window that you would launch from the task page over here. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and show you the mesh as well, but an easy to access feature over here. Another new icon is this select tool over here. This, I call it new because this is now the same select functionality that you get with SpaceClaim if you use SpaceClaim for preparing your CAD models. So for example, if you were to left click your mouse button, that particular object or geometry will be selected, and it also opens up your quick edit window. You could also do box select with it, just like you would do in SpaceClaim. So again, the idea is to make sure that users who are using different tools for various stages of simulation are able to do that seamlessly. Another new icon here is the probe icon. We had the probe functionality in previous versions of Fluent as well, but if I activate this and left click on any particular section, then you see the probe in the graphics window, and then in the console you have a lot of information about the probe position, what vertex has been selected, whatever information that Fluent can give you at that point, it's going to print that out on the console, right? And then another change to the toolbar is that instead of having two different icons for orthographic and perspective projection, you have a single button over here. So you can toggle between those two projections by choosing whichever projection you want to see. And then on the right over here, you will see these new icons. I know that, this functionality was present earlier as well. This is basically, turning on and off the reflections or the grid lines. But earlier we had to do it using the appearance and preferences menu, and it would be set for the entire session. Otherwise, it would become very tedious to, go and change those settings each and every time. But now you could, toggle these appearance options within each active window that you have in Ansys Fluent. The other new thing is this show all and hide selected surfaces function. So if, for example, you have selected a particular boundary or a geometry, you can select it and then hide that particular selected surface, so it makes it easier for you to examine your CAD. You can also go ahead and click on the show all button so that everything that you've hidden becomes visible instantaneously. If you do select any one particular boundary in the geometry, earlier in the earlier versions of Fluent, it wasn't very intuitive as to how to deselect the geometry. We would click the right mouse button, etc., hit the escape key. But now, they have a separate icon for deselecting the selected surfaces. So that makes it a little bit easier. The other thing is that if you're not interested in looking at the flow markers or the boundary markers, then you can go ahead and you can go ahead and turn this on and off using this new icon over here. Sometimes, for example, in this case, your geometry is pretty simple. You don't need to see where the inlet is, where the outlet is. You could go ahead and turn this feature off. So those are some of the newer features as far as the toolbars go. But even from a functionality point of view, or just ease of use point of view, Ansys has made some really cool changes. So in the previous versions of Ansys, um, we would have this option of right-clicking on any particular boundary and then displaying that boundary separately in the active window, right? With 2021 R1, what Ansys has allowed you to do is to display that particular geometry or boundary or whatever element you're looking at in a separate window altogether. So you could go ahead and click display, and what that would do is basically isolate that boundary in the active window. But you could also display this in a new window altogether. And you will notice that a new window pops open right over here. If I wanted to go ahead and display everything in this particular active window, you could do that. And you'll notice that this earlier window still just has the inlets displayed. One thing that I would like to point out is that if you notice on the top left corner of these windows, the Fluent icon shows up in blue. What that indicates is that this is a user window. There's a differentiation in terminology. When I say a user window, what do I mean? What I mean is you as a user are selecting some mesh objects to be displayed, and they are getting displayed in these user windows, right? But you have something called a reserved window as well. And what that is used for is to look at residual plots. So if I go ahead and plot the residuals over here, this is a solved case, you will notice in this window, the Fluent icon is gray, unlike the user windows in which it is blue. So this is called a reserved window. The reserved window is used only for residual plots, report plots, or animation objects. So for all those three things, you will use a reserved window. And for all the mesh related objects, you will use a user window. The idea behind this, differentiation is to make sure that, we're able to post process easily. And if we want more flexibility with, looking at our CAD model or examining the mesh or flow, then, we can do that using the user windows easily. The other thing is, for example, if you right click on this user window over here, you will see some options. Right now, these active windows, these user windows appear as tabs, but you could also go ahead and click full screen. You could also go ahead and click sub window. So there is a lot of flexibility with the way you handle these new windows, wherein you can see your geometry better. Let me go ahead and add this particular wall to the active window. So when I click on add to, you will notice that there are a couple of options. So these are basically the different windows that are available to us to add this particular geometry to. The active window would be the window that you're currently working. But for example, you wanted to add it to this window over here. I could go ahead and click mesh. And in that particular window, the wall boundary gets added. So depending on where and how you want to add your geometry, you could toggle between different windows. Please feel free to leave your questions while I'm going through with the features, and JD can post them to me as and when they come, in case you guys have any queries or if I need to repeat anything.
Yeah, there's one question, Snigdha. One of our attendees is asking, it goes back to a little bit about when you were talking about the probing. They said that they're trying to improve the design of a manifold. Is there any way to monitor the flow the flow is equal on every outlet?
So there are the obvious ways of, like checking that. So if the outlets have been assigned as different boundaries, they could go ahead and look at, create report definitions, or, look at the, report files and see the mass flow rate at the outlets of those individual boundaries. And that should be sufficient to verify whether they're getting equal flow for all the outlets. But for that kind of a thing, I wouldn't use the probe function, because your probe is just, indicating one node point or one, cell point. And, if you're looking at the flow on a boundary, then it has to be a mass weighted average, something of that sort. So a probe is only at one particular point, and that wouldn't be reflective of the entire boundary. So that's not the approach that I would use. So I hope that clears it up. Okay. Yeah, JD, feel free to, shoot the questions at me as and when they come, because I might, get ahead, and then a question may relate to something that I spoke about.
So they clarified, and they said they'd like to monitor an output parameter.
Okay, I can talk about it when I get to the results section. I can, like set up a report over here for this particular example, and
Okay.
that should help.
Thanks, Snigdha. Appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. Where was I? I have a page right next to me so that I don't forget about all the features that have been added. Ansys has really, upped its game with this newest release, and they have so many new cool features. Even though, they might seem like, small increments, but for me personally, as a user, I found them to be very useful, and I'm using them more and more as I solve my CFD cases. Another very cool feature, not a cool feature, but a long-standing request from customers, including people like myself, was when we solve on parallel cores, often we tend to see that your mesh gets partitioned, right? And in the past, for example, if I were to look at the outline view, okay, let me just do this. In the past, if I were to, use, parallel cores for computing, and my mesh gets split up, then I would be able to see the partition lines, which wouldn't look good at all. They would be jagged. But now Ansys has done away with it, so you can't see partition lines anymore. So for all your post-processing needs and, clipboard needs, I think this long-standing demand has been finally fulfilled, and we don't have to deal with partition lines anymore. Right. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is this warning section over here on the top right corner of the console. If you click on it, it's going to show you a tabbed view of all the warnings and errors that you've received while doing anything, like, while reading a case and data file, or while making any changes to your GUI or settings. If you want to ignore the warnings, you can go ahead and do that as well. Depends on, your particular case. But what I really like about these warnings and errors is that if you click on any one warning, it's actually a link to that particular message in your console window. So it'll take you to that exact location, where you received that particular warning. And what that allows you to do is, if you are dealing with like really heavy cases that have, too many boundaries, too many settings, and something somewhere went wrong, but, you're at a different stage in the console window and you don't know where exactly you encountered that error, then usually in previous versions, we would, keep scrolling up and down to see, oh, where did I find the warning message? Now you have the ease of just, opening this window over here and clicking on the message, and it'll take you directly to that location, and you can see exactly what happened before the warning or error message popped up, and it'll help you troubleshoot your problem that much easier. So another, cool new feature. You could clear all the messages if you wanted. I'm not gonna play around with it and just close this for the time being. The other thing is that if, for example, let me go ahead and select the faces over here. If, for example, I select on any one flow boundary, so right now I selected the inlet flow boundary, this quick edit window pops up. You will notice that it doesn't have any OK button. So when you make a change, sometimes there can be a confusion about, okay, I changed the value, did it actually get incorporated? So if I change the mass flow rate from 2 to 3, what happens? Does it get copied over? In earlier versions, you had to actually go into the panel and then double check from the outline view. But now you don't have to do that, because if you hit enter, you will get a message in the console window that confirms that change. So if it changed from 2 to 3 kilograms per second, then you will see that confirmation in the console window. So I'm going to go ahead and change it back to 2. And that is another thing that you can do in the latest version. Okay. The other thing that you can do is create multiple planes. So I did a right click on my window over here and clicked on surfaces, and then clicked on plane surfaces. And you can see that, there's a plane that has been created. You can obviously, move it very easily using the new plane tool. I know, people who've been using Ansys Fluent for a long time, they had long-standing complaints about, the plane tool being too tedious to use, but now it's easy to manipulate and move. One new thing that you can do in 2021 R1 is if you wanted to create multiple surfaces, you could do that. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to 2, and then, specify an offset spacing. If I do that, you can see that there is automatically another plane that gets created. So this is a good way of, if you have a straight length pipe section and you wanted to create multiple planes at different cross sections, you could do that easily using this feature. And when you hit create, you can see in the surfaces panel on the left that you have those additional planes available to you for post-processing now. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and display some of these tools, some of these planes over here, just so that I know. Okay, all right. So what I can do is I can box select these planes and then color them by a variable. So this particular simulation has already been solved. I'm going to go ahead and color them by static pressure. And you can see that, a contour has been generated, rather a scene has been generated. There's a difference in those two terminologies, because if I look on the left over here, under graphics, we have some contours from the case when it was saved, but just because I colored these new surfaces by the static pressure, that doesn't automatically show up. So what I can do is I can actually go to the scene here. So if I expand the scene, I could basically go ahead and look at the scene or in this case, let me go ahead and just create a different contour. The reason why I want to do that is so that we can see some more gradient. I wonder why it shows up like this. I don't want to see the reflection. Okay. We could go to graphics and change this, but let me not worry about that right now. What I basically wanted to show is that, you can now play around with the contour color bar by double clicking on it using the left mouse button. Earlier, we had to go into the graphics and manipulate this, and whatever settings we would choose would be copied over for all the contours that we are generating. But now we don't have to do that. So for any one particular contour, if I wanted to modify the color map, I could simply double click on it and basically, for example, change this from, exponential to float or general. I could, even alter the length. Whatever changes you make to this color map are individual or unique to this particular contour or scene. So it doesn't get carried over to all the graphics that you generate from here on in your particular simulation, right? So this new contour has been generated, and you can see that, this shows up as a separate results entity over here. Another cool thing is that, for example, if you had a different object like a mesh, you could simply drag and drop that onto your window. And now your window becomes a new scene, right? Because not only do you have, a contour in it, you also have a mesh object in it. So for example, if I wanted to show you this one particular scene over here, I could simply drag and drop the mesh over here. And, you would have both the objects available to you within that particular active window, right? I already had some of the scenes over here, so let me go ahead and display that. So this I had generated by dragging and dropping the mesh over onto the active window. And then once the scene gets saved, you could come here and, toggle the transparency of the mesh object just to make sure that you have the scene correctly shown over here. So with this drag and drop functionality, it's easy for you to, generate scenes and, play around with the different windows. Another new option right now is the ability to, save pictures of your particular. So let me move the console a little bit down. So you have a lot of different resolutions to save photos of your post-processing images. Some of these resolutions were not available in previous versions. So you could, select a custom resolution, you could scale to different values, and, you could really have some additional, resolutions to select from in this particular new version. Now, I did have an animation set up for this particular section. Let me see if it plays, otherwise I'll set one up again. Okay, never mind. So let me go ahead and select create another animation. Really fast. So this is animation 2. I want to save it in memory, and I would like my scene 2 in isometric view, and I'm gonna go ahead and record after every 2 iterations. And I created another animation. And what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm gonna go ahead and initialize my solution. And run my simulation. So whatever scenes I have created in post-processing, all of those windows pop up. I do want to go to the scaled residuals plot over here to highlight some of the things that I talked about earlier. One is that, you can see that, the scaled residuals are being generated in this reserved window over here. And then you can also see that the animation that I had set up for scene 2 is being recorded on a different window over here. Now, what if I wanted to see the scaled residuals along with my animation, right? So I would click on this and then choose this functionality called Embed In. And when I do that, what happens is that my residuals and my animation, they get played in the same window. Why is this useful? Sometimes when you're trying to understand how your flow is developing, how your residuals are converging, at what stage, your solution started to diverge, you might want to, correlate your contours results with the way your residuals are behaving. So for those sort of situations, I think this is a very good functionality wherein, you could embed the residual plot within the contour section. Now, keep in mind, it's not just restricted to the residual plot. You could also set up a report definition or a monitor, and that plot could be embedded in your animation as well. So when you save out this animation, say suppose using images, this embedded plot gets stored with that, and you are able to look at both those things simultaneously, right? And with that, let me talk a little bit about one of the best new features of Ansys Fluent in 2021 R1, which is how to create a summary report for your entire CFD simulation. I wanted to cover a few other topics in today's AVA, but I think we will run out of time if we do that. So I want to get to the good part as soon as I can. So I had a couple of things set up, right? Different graphics objects, a mesh, 3 different contours, some scenes. Someone talked about, monitoring the mass flow rate. So, you could go ahead and select a report definition. So for example, you could go ahead and do mass flow rate at any particular inlet and outlet, just set a name. And then if you wanted to create an output parameter, you could go ahead and check this box. I'm just showing this to answer that earlier question, but I'm not going to go ahead and do that because it's going to take up a little bit of my time. But that would be an easy way to check whether your flow rate is equal for both the boundaries. But about the report generation, with 2021 R1, at the very bottom over here, you have something called simulation reports. If you expand that, you have a report outline. Click on that. And what this basically lets you do is generate a one-stop report for your entire CFD setup. So you see all these sections on the left over here in the tasks page. there is a check mark against all these sections. All these sections are included in your report. So you'll have your system information, your geometry and mesh, your simulation setup, your solver run information, your post-processing results. Everything that you've done in this session of CFD gets reported in this particular report. You could try to make it a little bit more streamlined and efficient by unchecking some of these features if you don't need it. For example, if you didn't need the geometry and mesh information, if you were only looking for the post-processing results, just keep that checked, and then you don't have to bother about, the software taking a lot of time to generate this report. This report can be accessed in multiple ways. One is when you hit generate report, and there is an embedded report that gets created in Ansys itself. The other two ways is to generate a PDF report that contains all the information. And then you could also do an HTML report, which basically shows you, all the animation stuff that you won't be able to see in a hard copy PDF report, right? Depending on the fidelity of your simulation, if you have a lot of boundaries, a lot of parts, if the flow is complicated, then the report generation time would vary accordingly, which is why, I chose a simple example for this particular demonstration so that we don't waste a lot of time in generating this report. I had already created a report previously for this particular example. So you can see 3 different options at the bottom: generate report, view report, and export report. But if you had, if you wanted to generate a report for a fresh case, then you would only see the generate report option available to you. So right now, it's going to take some time to bring up the report that is already in the system. So you'll see that there are a table of contents in this particular report, and this corresponds to this report sections over here. The good thing about these sections is that if you wanted to change something, say suppose, for example, you go to your header section. Header section is this section right here. And you wanted to change something, you wanted to change a name, change the date, include more information. So let me go ahead and click on the header section. You can see only the analyst and the date is checked. If I also want to include the company name, KETIV, right? Then do I need to regenerate the entire report? No. You could simply make that change and then right click on that particular section and then click on refresh section. And that would make sure that your report is updated real time without regenerating the entire report, right? And most of this information is self-explanatory, but I do want to take some time to go over some of the sections. Suppose, for example, orthogonal quality. If you are trying to understand your mesh quality and you want to take a one-stop look at the mesh quality, then you could go to this section. You could look at the mesh size, mesh quality, and have that understanding from a 20,000 level foot view. You have material properties for fluid, for solid. Anything that you include in your domain will be reported over here. Similarly, for solver settings, what equations have you turned on? What discretization schemes have you used? I think it's also very handy if you're trying to collaborate with your teams, and suppose a CFD user is trying to share their work with someone else without sharing the case and data files. Then all you can do is send them the report, and they will still have a pretty good understanding of how you've set up your CFD case. If you're talking to a support person, for example, our customers often send us queries and they're not able to share the entire case and data file, or if it is too big to share, then just send us the report. We can take a look at that and get an overview understanding of what the geometry looks like and what settings you've used. You even get the run information. For example, for this particular case, I used 8 cores. It gives you the time taken to read the case and data, what is the peak memory that was used. So all sorts of information, that you include in your simulation are, is showcased in this one particular report. I also want to talk about the plots over here. I only had one plot for this example residuals, but even though this is an embedded report within Fluent itself, you'll see that, if I hover over these plot lines, it is giving me the data point at that particular location. And there are some cool features as well. You could compare data as well. So at any particular iteration, if you wanted to compare continuity and XYZ values, you could do that. For residuals, it might not be that important, but suppose, you want to look at report plots or data values, then, this functionality may come in very handy, right? And all the scenes that I had, they get reported as well. You get 2 types of scene. One is a simple 2D scene with which you can't really play around, but you also have a 3D scene. I don't know what happened to this guy, but basically, you could manipulate and, zoom in, zoom out and read the value as well. So a lot of flexibility with playing around with your results once you access this particular report. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that suppose you have a really heavyweight CFD case and you're dealing with a lot of boundaries and you don't want your report to consume so much time to be generated and then read. You only want to report out the modifications that you made to your CFD setup, but the default boundary settings, you're not interested in that. In that case, you could check this section called show only modified settings. And what that would allow you to do is only include those boundaries or those setups that you've changed in the model. So that makes your report a little less time and space consuming, right? So once you have your report generated, this didn't take me a lot of time to generate because this was a simple case. You could go ahead and export this as a PDF or an HTML file. I did both for the example case. So let me go to the folder and I'll show you the simulation report in both forms. So this was the PDF report that was generated in the same working directory that I had selected for the case and data file. So it's the same thing, right? Apart from the animations, everything else that was generated, you could simply, look at the PDF file. And the good thing about the PDF and the HTML files is that, like I said, you don't have to send another person the case and data files. You could do that if you wanted them to have everything, then you would simply copy paste the case and data files and this folder over here, which says Fluent Report Server. As long as they have this folder and the case and data file, they would be able to open the report within Fluent itself and make modifications to it. I also had the HTML version open right here. And in the HTML version, you do get to see the animations. So that is one advantage that you have for the HTML section. So really cool and very beneficial, I would say, functionality that I at least personally plan to use quite often with my customers and with Ansys support. I do see that there are a lot of questions. JD, do you want to shoot the questions over so that I can answer them? I know, we're kind of nearing the end.
Yeah, we only have one question, and I believe you might have already answered this. How do you set Fluent in section and out of section boundary conditions?
In section and out of section boundary conditions?
Yeah.
Let me see. How do you set Fluent in section in out section. I'm not sure I understand the question correctly. Like for the fluid domain, whatever is your volume, fluid volume is your in section, I would say. And your boundaries, determine where the flow is coming in and coming out. If it's inlet, then, the flow is coming into the volumetric domain. And if it's outlet, then the flow is going out of the volumetric domain. So I don't know if I answered that correctly, but that would be my understanding of, the question. But if we don't have any more questions, let me just quickly summarize today's session. What we learned is that, 2021 R1 has a new GUI, new functionalities in the toolbar. We can now embed report and results windows within animation scenes. I didn't get to talk about the expression part. That was another thing that I wanted to cover. There are some cool new features and functionalities for expressions in Ansys Fluent. Please let us know, if you want to learn a little bit more about it, and I'll be sure to include that in a future session. And lastly, we talked about how to generate a comprehensive CFD report for whichever simulation you're working with. That I think is one of the highlights from a usage standpoint in the latest release of Ansys Fluent. Before I conclude, I do want to, mention that we had a lot of help from Ansys and Ansys engineers, such as Harish Kanchi and Pablo Aguado. So thank you so much, guys, for helping us build on the content and training us internally on the newer features. Did want to, give them a shout out. So with that, I think, we've come to an end of today's session. Yeah, see you next time and have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.